So I have this USB hub, picked it out of a box of stuff, and this is kind of a nice form factor because the cable's included in it, and this is a nice thing. However, it doesn't seem to work. So let's see if I can figure out why that is. First thing I tend to try to do is just see if there's any damage to any of the openings. If any of these pins are bent in such a way that causes a short, that would certainly cause this not to work. So I can check that first. Just kind of look inside. The microscope's probably going to be better at this. This one looks perfectly fine. This one looks perfectly fine. Looks like that's just a little bit of debris there. That also looks perfectly fine on the outside, and we'll look at the male connector as well. Don't see anything wrong with those. Take a look at device manager as we plug this guy in. See if anything is detected here. USB device not recognized. Device descriptor request failed. Oh, that's better. Do I actually see an additional device here? I do see a generic USB hub. Am I getting signal through this? I am. Well, there's my flash drive. This is kind of not what I expected. Last time I plugged this in, we got nothing. Don't know why we're not able to eject it. Doesn't seem particularly happy. It's no longer checking for updates on this. Problems ejecting USB. That would have just been Windows. Let's see if we get good voltage pass through. Just plug in a USB power device. And that does work. Do we get power pass through from the USB hub? Do. Is that stable? Looks to be pretty stable. We're not getting any device reconnections. I do want to pop this open and see if anything inside could be intermittent. Like I said before, I plugged this in, nothing was detected, and no devices downstream were recognized by the host. Looks like I can just pop some of these corners open. Just like that. These clips, one of them's missing at this point. Pretty simple here. I do want to just get a thermal profile. I'll just plug this guy in again. And we're back to USB device not recognized now. That is actually pretty substantial amount of heat. It's diminishing. The comparative heat dissipated off of the display here. Looks like that's about 48 Celsius and climbing. So that would be a problem. Now, is this intermittent? Do I get an unknown sometimes, but then other times it works? Device not recognized. We did briefly get this thing to mount a USB drive, but it could be that only under certain thermal conditions does that happen, and then it locks up otherwise. Device not recognized. Device not recognized. Now, when we have device not recognized, are we going to be able to transmit power through this? Or is this a partial short? We are transmitting power through it, even though it's not recognized. Since we're here and we have this fan, if I cool that chip down, I just want to see if it has something to do with the temperature that chip is when it's plugged in. It could be that it's stable as long as the chip is cool, but whatever internal short might be causing that to heat up so much, it's sinking enough power that once it heats up, that chip can't be read. See if that made any difference. And still not recognized. Let's just examine the face of the chip and anything around it under a microscope. Here is the chip. Let's get a little bit more vertical here. Let's look at the legs around the chip here and just see if anything is bridged or missing. That looks like maybe just a little bit of debris here. That's just a piece of dust sitting on top of it. Okay, nothing looks that bad on the chip itself. Let's angle this in underneath the USB adapters a little bit. Can't see much along the USB connections. Let's look at the back side. Just kind of sweep back and forth, see if anything seems interesting here. This is the back of where that chip is. Solder flux maybe left there on the board. I'm going to flip this around here and start looking at the other side. The back of where that pad is. That looks a little interesting. This is the back side of the USB male plug. And that looks potentially repaired right there, and that is very close to touching the adjacent solder. I doubt that that's actually the problem, since it does appear to power on in some cases and let power through if it was dead shorted. I don't know that that would be true, but that would be shorting either ground or VCC to one of the data lines, which could cause it to have this exact problem. In fact, let's see if those two pins are actually making contact with each other. Okay. Check the outside too. Nothing. And then let's check this guy. There is some conducting happening there. Don't know if that's within margin or not. Obviously, these are connected to some logic on this. If I can manipulate this back and forth just slightly and get any change in that, that would be a clear indication that that solder joint is at play. Yeah, the other data line is also just slightly conductive, as is ground. So I'm inclined to say that's not a short, but it is a little worrying looking, and I might clean that up just so that it's not so close to making contact there. It doesn't look that much better, actually. Might just be too much solder here. Under control. Just for the sake of testing, I want to see if our resistance has changed at all now that that solder is under better control. Doesn't look like it. That's probably a completely normal value there. You just want to test this again and see if we get anything different. I'm going to see if my flash drive mounts. If there is a thermal window, then it's not going to be much. But let's just see if that has any impact with that solder repair or not. We get a pretty immediate heat, and USB device is not recognized. So that solder, at least, is not the problem there. I will also just try a little IPA, since this is directly behind where the chip is that gets so hot. Now that that area is clean, I also want to just take another real close-up look at it. Certainly not seeing anything that's coming close to looking like a short circuit. Mostly that's not flux, I don't think that's glue. Still some of those fibers in there. Put this out here. Yeah, nothing else jumps out at me here. Try just a little more alcohol broadly across the back of this. Just looking with my eye on the very edge of this corner here, I do see another little just interesting thing. I don't know if that's ink or... Okay, yeah, that's just on the surface. Nothing to worry about. Flip this over again, this edge with this 3-point connector. That's a little ugly looking, but I don't think that that's making any cross contact. Something loose. I'm just being really sort of over thorough here, looking for anything that could be making contact or bridging connections together. Just a surface imperfection. Oh, that looks interesting. Stray piece of solder. Well, that would certainly cause a problem if that's been there. All right, so there was that one little weird thing that was going on right here. You can see if now that that's been removed, we get a better operational stability. These pins also do look like something had been soldered there potentially and removed. Is what they look like on the bottom. This again now with the thermal on. And we're still device not recognized, and that's heating up just like it had. Just do another pass with my eyes. Every once in a while I'll be under the microscope and completely miss something that's just too big. I don't notice it. Well, this might qualify actually. Back under the microscope. There's a giant ball of solder just kind of stuck to the bottom of this capacitor, very close to where that other smaller piece had been. Let's see if this is loose or if this is stuck here. Definitely doesn't look like it's stuck to the capacitor. That doesn't seem like it would absolutely cause this problem, but certainly not normal. It does appear to be a through-hole capacitor. These two legs here, 1 and 2, should release that capacitor. I just want to take it out and look at the bottom and see what the heck's going on here. As I remove this, I'll just remember that the negative side is toward the outside of the board here. Not working very well. Try this again here. Really sure that's not doing much. I can start just trying to pull the capacitor off. Part of the problem is this is just not staying in place, but not a lot I can do there. Yeah, and that just snapped it right off. Okay. Well, that's not what I wanted to do. What a mess. Well, this capacitor is definitely ruined at this point. 16 volt, 100 microfarad. Let's see if I have anything in that realm. There's that giant blob of solder that's stuck to the outside of it. Not sure when that got there or if that ever caused a problem. Let's finish getting the broken leads out of there. I don't know why I can melt the solder so thoroughly and those are just stuck right in place there, but gotta get them out if I'm gonna get a new capacitor in there. Just blow a bunch more solder on here and see if maybe I can get those out. Try to get the loose solder out of there now. The problem is this board is so thick that it soaks so much of the heat so quickly. What I can do is confirm a theory. See, without that capacitor installed, do we get any difference here? USB device not recognized, that chip is heating up. That ground plane just soaks up all of the heat. That's why that's so hard to solder. 40 degrees and falling. All right, it's cooler than my hand now. Cleaning off that area on both sides here. Okay, even though I don't think that'll make any difference, I'm gonna go see if I have any of these capacitors. So what is this thing anyway? The outer shell is a little beat up here, but it's an SI 105 degrees. There's 100 microfarad, 16 volt, and there is that giant blob of solder stuck to the bottom of it. Like I said, it's possible this had nothing to do with the actual problem, but don't know why that was there. It might have been making contact with the traces on the board. Doubtful it made any contact with those two pegs on the bottom because we don't see any trace of that happening there. Either way, that's definitely odd, and I don't mind replacing this. I do just need to source a replacement. So the other thing I need to know is the dimensions of this guy. Diameter is about 6.6 millimeter, and height, obviously without the legs getting in the way because they're not even there, 5.7. 5 by 7 seems to be a somewhat common approximate size. I can find these 16 volts, 100 microfarads relatively easily. So I'll pick up a set of these. I, like I just saw, don't think that that's actually going to solve this problem, given that the same issue occurs without that capacitor, but this way I will be able to put that back and also have this on hand for other projects in the future. In the meantime, I'm just going to see if anything's wrong with this actual connector here, since it can be potentially a loose point. Pull this out. Nothing looks wrong in there. Pretty straightforward. Nothing looks odd there either. I'm just going to press on the pins on the back side of this connector and see if any of them appear to move in front. Those all look very solid. I'm not worried that any of those are loose. Since there were a total of 7 radial caps on this board, there's always a possibility that some of these caps are degraded and leaking. I'm not seeing any evidence on the surface of the board that there is any electrolyte leak, but that would be another potential cause for a once working circuit to eventually start causing a fault. If that timing were getting stuck and then sending this into a loop here. I'm presuming that this temperature that we see on this chip is above what its specification should be, because it quickly exceeds 40 degrees Celsius, hotter than the computer gets on the surface of it. And that's unlikely to be good for a hub, which really shouldn't absorb much power. One thing we can potentially do is check for any voltage drop. What we can do is just grab a USB cable which has a barrel jack on the end. This is only really going to connect the two grounded VCC lines to the inner and outer sides of this barrel jack. I presume that's going to be center positive. It should be back 5 volts. And when measuring on the 10 volt setting, it is solidly 5 volts. Okay, and I'm going to plug this in line here and see what our voltage is after this chip here is allowed to consume, presumably what it's going to consume. Plug that in, and we do see that starting, and our device not recognized. And it is slightly under 5. It's maybe 4.9. And does this drop over time? 4.5-ish. We're at 50 degrees Celsius at the hottest point. So we're definitely losing voltage to that chip there. Yeah, 52 degrees Celsius. That chip is getting so hot that it is sinking enough power to drop the voltage on the 5 volt rail. That's what the bottom of it looks like. The bottom's already 39 degrees Celsius. Again, without that connected there, we're getting a very healthy 5 volts. So I'm not really able to go much further with this at the moment. This has been a demonstration of some diagnostic theory and some tests, a little bit of soldering practice, and I'll have a little bit more chance to practice when I get the new capacitors in. I did go ahead and order a set of 20. We potentially could recap the rest of this just to see if any of these capacitors had leaked underneath, caused a partial bridge, and maybe that's upsetting some other timing, but I imagine these are mostly just buffering the power rail. So I'll have a little bit more time to practice soldering when I get the new capacitor in here. So during editing, I was just reviewing the microscope footage, and I did find a couple of things that seemed a little bit interesting. Probably not of consequence, but it may be worth taking a look here anyway. On the back of this 24 megahertz crystal oscillator here are those 2 pins with it's like 2 capacitors or resistors in between them. One of those pins looks like perfectly normal through hole, and the other one looks like sort of a blob, and I don't see any visible cracking on it, but when solder has that perfectly rounded shape, you can think of it this way, just straight vertical dome and then continuing flat line, that can be an indication that the solder did not actually make good contact with the pad underneath it. If that were floating and that 24 megahertz signal is not being transmitted or intermittently transmitted, that could certainly cause problems. I'm just going to heat that up and see if I can reflow that joint there. It's just a shorter leg there, so it's not going to let the leg pop through the top the same way that the other side does. The only other thing I noticed was a little bit hard to show here, but behind this pad where the chip on the other side has gotten very hot, we do see just a slightly yellow tinge to the solder mask, and that can be normal repeated heat. The only other place I see that similar sort of heat signature marking is right here on the center pin of this voltage regulator. So I do want to flip this over as I plug it in. I'm going to presume that this will heat up on the back the same way that it has every other time that we get that on a USB device. But I want to see if we get a heat signature here that would corroborate that slightly discolored look that we see over here, just to see if there's another data point we should be looking at for what could be causing that overheating chip. Just for the sake of trying, we'll also plug in this flash drive as we perform this test, in case it does end up mounting. Now we do get, looks like that is right on that voltage regulator. Nearly as hot on the bottom side as the bottom side of that chip. So those are actually 2 different hot spots. More thermal soak under that chip. It does seem to take longer to dissipate, but from the bottom side at least, that VRM heats up very quickly. And we are getting that USB device not recognized error, same as before. I do just want to confirm the function of that chip. That is ATC4AA17-33. Well, I don't see any hits for this precise marking. 1733 does seem to indicate a 3.3 volt voltage regulator. So since we're seeing so much heat come off of this, especially that center pin, it looks like, this is another thing that's potentially suspect, or at least just responding to whatever the problem is on this board. Just another clue as I continue to pursue the answer. The other thing I can do is just look up what this chip is, and whether it's got a 2.0 USB hub chip, or whether we're stuck with 1.1 if this does work at the end of the day. The computer, very briefly, when it did work, didn't prompt me about plugging a USB 2.0 device into a 1.1 hub, so I imagine this is a USB 2.0 hub, but we can confirm that. Part number looks like CY7C65640-LFC. It does look like this is a USB 2.0 high-speed hub. So if we were to be able to get this working, this is marginally more useful than if it were just to be a USB 1.1 hub. In the use case I have a couple of these cameras, this little microscope camera and a regular webcam, as well as the thermal camera. And this laptop only has 2 USB ports. So this would be a perfect use case. This is actually what I pulled it out for and why I discovered it was broken. So still going to pursue this down the road, and we'll see what else I can learn along the way about my technique and testing and how to repair faults like this, where all we really see is a giant heat signature on a chip and don't really have any other external clues as to what happened to cause this fault, other than perhaps some red herrings with solder stuck to the side of a capacitor that ultimately probably wasn't impacting anything about the circuit. But for now, that's all I got. So thanks for watching.